Hello, in this final lecture, we are going to be discussing Egyptian religion. And the religion and the worshiping a variety of gods who are depicted in art and architecture as both animal and human features. These images reflect a belief that the gods each had a particular animal through which they revealed themselves to human beings. Egyptian gods were associated with powerful natural objects, emotions, qualities, technologies. And examples are Re or Ra, the sun god. Iris, the goddess of love and fertility. Uh, Thoth, the god of wisdom and the inventor of writing. And people worship these gods with rituals and prayers and festivals that express their respect and devotion to the divine powers. The gods had to be appeased and balanced. Egyptians regarded their king as a helpful divinity in human form and identified with the hawk headed god Horus. They saw the king's rule as divine because he generated Mot, um, which roughly translates into what is right. The supernatural force that brought order and harmony to humans as if they maintained a stable hierarchy. Mot is very important. Mot is also represented as a goddess, embodiment of the divine force of justice, uh, who oversaw a society that the Egyptians believed would fall apart violently if the king ruled unjustly. Which is kind of some of the reasons why the intermediate periods were viewed as unjust kings ruled unjustly, and then Mot abandoned them. The idea of what is what right. The king's duties of pleasing the gods, making laws, and waging wars on enemies were all part of this idea. Every aspect of Egyptian life had some kind of religious element. Gods represented the geography. Gods represented different elements. We've already talked about like Tufnut and some of the other goddesses and their roles. But we're going to look at Egyptian religious core myth of the Egyptian gods and that summarizes the fundamental beliefs of the Egyptians. And to look at this is we're going to look at the myth of Isis and Osiris. The myth here is that they're a happy married couple, Isis and Osiris, a husband and wife, brother and sister. This incestuous relationship was common in many periods of Egyptian rule. As we saw with Hatshepsut and others, is that brothers and sisters would often marry each other and rule as kings and queens because as pharaohs and queens, um, because it was seen as the most direct line of Egyptian rule. Like in many other stories, there's an element of an evil character, and this is with their brother Set. Set captures Osiris and throws him into a box into the Nile River. Isis, as a dutiful wife, must embark on a difficult journey searching for his body. She finds the body, and remember, you're supposed to be buried in Egypt. So the fact that Set throws him and gets him into the box and throws him in the Nile, is really important. Now, how he gets him into the box is really interesting. Set says, well, he builds this box and he says, I believe you can't fit in there. And Osiris is like, well, I can fit in there. And Set goes, no, you can't. And he tricks him and he closes the box. He throws it in the Nile. It drowns. And so Isis then has to search for the body. She finds the body. She gets her hands back on the body of Osiris. Set then steals the body back, and he chops Osiris's body up into 14 pieces and scatters them all around Egypt and other places around the world. Now, this is really important. Dividing him into 14 pieces. Now, 7 is typically a very magical number in ancient Egypt, so the fact that it's 14 is part of doubling that lucky number. So He takes the 14 pieces and he scatters them around. Isis now has to search for all the pieces. She is resourceful and manages to find 13 pieces, but can't find the 14th piece. Now, the 14th piece was a personal body part, essentially his penis. Couldn't find his penis. So what she does is she becomes very resourceful and she makes him a replacement penis out of wood, which apparently she was very content with because remember there's rebirth. So Isis really they have a good sexual relationship after with this wooden penis. Isis uses her magic powers, glues Osiris back together, and he becomes the first mummy. So that brings it around of mummies into religion. He comes back to life and he becomes the lord of the underworld. Now, this myth involving the gods is a metaphor that you go through life's journey to find things, and maybe everything goes right, but sometimes you're going to have um, uh, uh, complex scenarios, adventures that you have to go on. But there's the eternal hope that there is life after death. So Osiris's life, death, and then he is reborn the god of the underworld. Now, one final, the concept of Mot, we really didn't get to go into much detail with it, but Mot is difficult to translate. It encompasses modern notion of morality with order and what is perceived to be divine equilibrium and balance. The Egyptian conviction that the universe is arranged by predictable patterns and hierarchies ties in to gain the entrance into the underworld. So, in order to gain entrance into the afterlife, the soul, the Ka, had to go into a very difficult journey, but it had to pass tests. The failure or passage is based on if you lived with a just and moral life. That's really important. You have to live just and morally. Probably the key moment in the afterlife is when you meet Osiris. Remember the god of the underworld. Your heart, where your soul was placed on one side of the scale, and on the other side was a single feather, the feather of truth. If a person was just moral and lived the best moral life, then your heart was the same weight as the feather of truth. Then you passed. If you had been a bad person, your heart would be weighed down with lies and deceit, and your heart would be flipped off the scales into a hideous monster, usually represented by a half crocodile, who would eat your soul, and your soul would be snuffed out forever. So you could not be reborn. That's really important. You couldn't be reborn if you lived an unjust life. If your heart was pure, then you would go to a meeting and gathering of the 42 gods. So in front of the 42 gods, you're going to swear an oath of negative confession. Now this is important, of negative confession. It was a series of statements that you would have to swear that you did not do these things. For example, from the Book of the Dead, is a part of the prayer of the oath of negative confession, in which it says, and I quote, "I have not committed any sins against man. I have not committed any sins against the gods. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not committed adultery. I have not bullied the poor man. I have not cheated any man. I have not caused any man to be hungry. I have taken milk I have not taken milk from the mouths of little children. I am pure. I am pure." End quote. If the oath was accepted by the gods, then your soul would go to immortal paradise. Egyptian emphasis of Mot and moral belief was a prerequisite to the link into from a stable life in which you lived. The powerful force of nature set the rules, and the world was nicely patterned. Now, we've discussed Mesopotamia and Egypt. So both in Mesopotamia and Egypt influenced geography and the influence of culture on beliefs. This is an interesting note of the environmental differences between the nurturing of Egyptian and the hostility between uh, uh, between the Mesopotamian. life. And so what does the afterlife look like for Mesopotamia? So Mesopotamia, the afterlife was in the underworld. The spirits of the dead had to live for all eternity. There was no light. Death, the dead had to crumble into blackness. It was hot. It was dusty, and the dead had to stumble about an intense thirst without water to quench it. There was no food. Inhabitants had to fill their mouths with dust and continually chew it. Everyone ended up there, good life or not. Everyone was naked, and all their possessions were left behind. The dead had to wander aimlessly through appalling landscapes forever. There was no relinquishing. Egypt afterlife was much different. The afterlife, if you had gone through and you had the land of the dead was a lush paradise. The sun shone down benevolently, and rich fields of perpetual harvest of abundance, no disease or suffering. And anyone rich or poor had equal plots of land to take care of. The labor was little because of you were buried with little figurines, and these figurines, like usually like clay figurines or stone figurines, would come to life, and they would be your workers. Um, and they would toil for you. You would have all the possessions that you had in your forelife, including like they would be buried. People would be buried with board games and hobbies and their pets, and you would have all these in your afterlife. And if you were granted them with good moral lives, life was good. You existed in a world of paradise. It was seen as if your heart was pure, that everything would be good. The geography was great. You would have the abundance of the Nile. You would have the water of life that was perpetually shining down on you. So the Egyptian afterlife was far more equal with men and women. Men and women went the same thing. It was less dismal. It was more optimistic because you wanted you as much as you lived your life according to Mott, a good, just life. Afterwards, your life would be beneficial because of it. However, in Mesopotamia, everything was dark and pessimistic, and you have this life force of life sucks. It's just gonna get worse. In Egypt, you could live in abundance and purity and have a wonderful life. So some scholars like to discount the environment when looking at uh, Egypt and looking at Mesopotamia, but it appears like the geography played an important role in both Mesopotamia and Egypt, and how they viewed life, how they viewed their culture, how they viewed their afterlife. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about Egyptian religion, particularly through the myths of Osiris and Isis. They have a son, Horus, who is the representative. We talked a little bit about Horus in medicine, about how he's losing his eye. There's also a really interesting myth between Isis and Horus, in which Isis is she goes to stay at pretty much an inn, a place, because Horus is very sick. He's very sickly when he's a child, and a woman comes to the door and refuses them a place to stay. Iris gets very angry. She calls upon 13 scorpions to come out, and the scorpions come together, and they put all their poison into one mega scorpion, and the mega scorpion ends up killing um, the son of the woman who refuses to take care of Horus and Isis. And in pity, Isis gives back life. She grants rebirth. She already rebuilt Osiris, but she also gives life to the woman's child out of sympathy. And this really Isis has a lot of great power in the fact that she deals with medicine, but also she has healing powers, and she deals with rebirth, and she's one of the most powerful goddesses within Egyptian culture. So there's very interesting ways to look at Egyptian mythology, particularly with their 42 gods. It's very complex. There's a lot of intermarriage, but just to give you a snapshot of how Egypt really looked on the afterlife and why it was so important to live a good life according to Mott. So I hope you enjoyed learning about Egyptian mythology and their religion.